Well, now, the title speaks for itself, doesn't it? But for those of you who are not quite aware, because not all of us live in the United States of America, and this is a uniquely American creation, America Freedom 250 was intended as part of the Great American State Fair Initiative, a music festival to help celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States of America. It was also originally intended to be non-partisan. But of course, given the current president and political climate, there's no way that assumption would have ever held, and the majority of the performers, many who seem to be picked from a grab bag of late 80s and early 90s acts who probably needed the money, they've dropped out, spanning from Morris Day and the Time to Martina McBride, from the Commodores and Young MC to Bret Michaels of Poison. In fact, as of roughly right now, the only two performers who apparently did not drop out, Vanilla Ice and Flo Rida. Sometimes the jokes just write themselves, I swear to God. Ergo, it's led to a bit of an event planning kerfuffle, where the current president has alternated between booking himself as the major headlining attraction and publicly musing on canceling the whole event. And as a Canadian music critic and cultural commentator with all sorts of fun opinions, I have to push back against any sort of retreat. Where's your can-do spirit? Your desire to put on a proper show, whatever the costs might be? The United States of America only gets one semi-quincentennial. You want to ensure that the hot dogs and ice cream are upsold, and the fireworks still sound to terrify dogs and cats everywhere. You need a headlining act, a modern name with star power, critical acclaim, able to speak to the American experience in 2026 with candor and vigor. So off the back of his new album Crybaby, the West Coast rapper Vince Staples, he shouldn't just perform at American Freedom 250. Nay, he should headline the event. So welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture. Here's a conveniently numbered list as to why. Number 1, you can't just cancel it. Quite frankly, I feel a little bad for the event planning staff coordinating this whole boondoggle, especially if they actually are nonpartisan. They just wanted to try and put on a good show. If they're contractors, that might be likely. But even if they are not nonpartisan, welcome to a ground of very slim olive branches. If you work behind the scenes at a festival, you know precisely how many things will go wrong and how ornery people get when there are last-minute cancellations on your bill. How else are you going to be able to satisfy the presumed tens of thousands of baby boomers and presumably bitter middle-aged Gen X's stumbling into the Capitol, expecting them to be entertained? How many of them booked their tickets and hotels ahead of time, possibly months in advance, and may not have even realized certain acts have pulled out or canceled? We're talking about the low-information voter demographic after all. You have to be prepared for that assumption. They're just looking to take in the sights, maybe tour Washington, D.C. in all of its military crackdown glory. Maybe a sign that the majority black Washington, D.C. should have something close to statehood or congressional representation. Hell, Vince Staples might have been able to draw attention to such interesting quirks in the American Republic in his presentation. I wonder if that's foreshadowing. But quite frankly, I've heard the calls from the current president that he should just cancel the whole thing. It's been more trouble than it's worth. Bitch move. Or that he should be the prime attraction. All offense intended, Vince Staples just put out a new album that I would personally rather hear live than said president who, let's be honest, he's just running through his greatest hits at low energy, assuming he doesn't wander into strange, lethargic, rambling tangents. If I wanted that, I'd go see Mark Kozlik. Or Morrissey. Or Kanye West. Number 2, Vince Staples puts on a great show and he's probably affordable. Listen, with the newfound dearth of performers here, there's a lot of freed up money in this festival's budget, and not all of it is going to the administration for prediction market insider trading. You can probably afford Vince Staples. He's not an A-list rapper, although he probably should be. You could probably even pay him a premium. In fact, you're going to have to pay him a premium. He is about getting that money thanks to what streaming has done to the modern music industry. He's newly off of Def Jam and on Loma Vista, with more creative control and presumably a smaller marketing budget given his very lean press tour. And you are desperate for names that actually make some good music, who are relevant with the youth or just the modern population of today, and not whatever coked out mediocre booking agent pull out of his list of names from 1995. Because If you are not familiar with Vince Staples, well, I've been reviewing him for over a decade now, where I could argue that I was even late to the party given his excellent 2014 EP. What's your excuse? But more seriously, Vince Staples is one of the most perennially underappreciated rappers of the past 15 or so years, where it never seems like he has gotten his fair shake, his proper flowers, and that strikes me as rather unfair, especially on his recent hot streak, coming off the fantastic 2024 album Dark Times. Don't pay too much attention to what's on the cover. You won't see it unless you're looking for it. In fact, I would argue that Vince Staples does not get as much credit as he deserves for how accessible his music can really be. He hasn't had traditional hits on the Hot 100, but he's got a wealth of melodically satisfying bangers with memorable hooks that would have you bouncing in no time. And let's be real, how many songs was anyone really looking to remember from some of the acts that were booked from this festival previously? Are you widely familiar with the catalogs of Young MC and Vanilla Ice to take in their full set? Does anyone unfamiliar with country know a fourth Martina McBride song besides This One's for the Girls, Wild Angels, and Independence Day? Sidebar, do you think she would have done This One's for the Girls anyway? Would that have struck a questionable note with the number of, let's call them Virgin Island connoisseurs in the current administration? Look, my point is that if you don't know Vince Staples, this would be your opportunity to learn and have some fun with great music along the way. I know that many in America don't especially like learning things, but surely on the semi-quincentennial, you'd make an exception, right? Number 3, finally getting rid of Vanilla Ice. So if we add Vince Staples to the bill, that gives us him, Flo Rida, Vanilla Ice. None of this crap about adding Lee Greenwood or any number of marching bands. What is this, an SEC college football game for an unranked school? No. I think if we keep to do those 3, an all hip-hop presentation, it might show the world on the semi-quincentennial what music genre is truly dominant across American culture as it has been for decades. And let's be honest, given mainstream rap this year, they could probably use it too. But this means in the green room, it would probably be those 3 rappers, probably not many others, the entourage is dead, but Vince would likely bring more of a crew. As he should, he is the headliner. But I don't know about you, if we put Vince Staples and Vince Staples' people and Vanilla Ice in the same room together long enough, I reckon only one of the performers walks out at the very end with all their limbs and gonads in the correct position, not experiencing some strenuous physical examination or getting the willies, and I think that's the headliner. At the very least, we probably don't have to see Vanilla Ice for some time, and good thing too. At best, we'd probably take him up on that offer to go perform for Vladimir Putin. I think he might find a friendlier crowd, and if things happen to go wrong over there, he should avoid standing by open windows. Number 4. There is a tradition of Americana in this album that should be celebrated in the sound. Regardless if you know Vince Staples or not, if you've heard anything of the buzz and rollout of Crybaby, incidentally major thanks for reclaiming this album's title from Melanie Martinez's creep show debut of derivative sound design, it is Vince Staples reportedly making a rock album, a genre swerve that he's fought to make for some time and probably the biggest change in his sound since Big Fish Theory in 2017. The guitars have more jagged, distorted sizzle. The up-tempo bass lines have more swaggering, propulsive stomp. There's an earthy crunch to the percussion, live drums or drum machines alike, all which is impressively well produced and balanced courtesy of co-production from veterans Mike Hector and Sate Mino, both who had done some excellent work on Dark Times alongside Vince Staples himself. Really, the only quibble I have is the slightly blown-out kick drum on Do You Know the Devil, alongside the loop of the baby crying, but the rock tones are familiar enough where it even prompted an amusing semi-viral comparison on social media that he is rapping over Hozier or the Black Keys production from 2014. Now, as someone who reviewed both of those albums 12 years ago, this is really funny in a very layered way beyond the superficial comparison to songs that have like the grinding bass of Go Go Gorilla or the haunted White Flag or the thicker stonking groove of Only in America. The Black Keys album 2014, that was their goopy psychedelic Turn Blue, a considerable shift away from their established garage blues sound that irked a lot of the fans, especially the pop ones that hopped on board. The comparison that might make more sense is like El Camino or Brothers, those early 2010s projects. And I mean, there was a breadth of blues, soul, gospel, and folk music on Hozier's self-titled debut, well beyond any smoked-out, reverb-heavy rock texture of the time. But also, both acts would likely acknowledge how their sounds were drawing from the historical lineage of black blues rock, where Vince Staples is highlighting a lot of common lineage and elements. Hell, if you want to make an indie rock adjacent comparison, or a parallel to like TV on the Radio or Young Fathers, some of the moments where the grimier post-punk revival met hip-hop and then mutated in fascinating ways. Not quite with the same fire and brimstone intensity as an Algiers, but they could play on the same radio station or playlist. But that also does a disservice to the distinctive bent in which Vince Staples actually takes his sound. Because while the Black Keys are Ohio boys drawing a lot from the Deep South and the darkest and most humid portions of it, and Hozier is Irish, and his genre blend is both deeply rooted in his home country, but also pulls broadly from across the United States with about as much respect in the cultural exchange as you could possibly get. He made Nina Cried Power with goddamn Mavis Staples of all people. Vince Staples' sound is in California, through and through. A state with a rock legacy that runs deeper than possibly any other outside of Memphis blues and Seattle grunge. Listen to the tempos and bass lines. It's hard not to hear traces of early surf rock, or funk rock, or skate punk, or hell, so much punk rock, or the smoked out melting pot of sounds that reflects a lot of the sweltering summer heat and the cavalier swagger of the West Coast, particularly Southern California. Hell, let's get specific. So much of rap rock came out of Southern Cali, though Red Hot Chili Peppers, Faith No More, Linkin Park, goddamn Rage Against the Machine, to say nothing of nu metal. There's a lineage that might not always have the greatest of reputations, but given the critical rehabilitation of some of those acts, or just the mercenary acknowledgement that the genre crossover made boatloads of cash among angry white boys, along with how Vince Staples' bars have always been bluntly declarative and an easy fit for the genre, it's almost too obvious. Hell, The Big Bad Wolf flips Children's Story by Slick Rick with a stuttering, jagged guitar, a much better flip than when Nas pulled off on Nasir back in 2018, and it's hard not to imagine this fitting with every scratch of that vintage era of rap rock. And that skates over, pun intended, so much of the rock textures and attitude that have been in Vince Staples' sound since damn near the beginning, from the jangling, smoked-out ending of Summertime '06, to how FM literally contains the most flagrant of Green Day homages in its album cover. The credit to Vince Staples to all of those tones is that it's recognizable, but he doesn't sound beholden to any one of them specifically. He's casting his embrace of rock in his own lane as a rapper, especially alongside albums like Red Star Woo and The Worldwide Scourge by Genesis Owusu, which has its own distinct rock textures that's more upbeat overall, but no less critically acclaimed. Hell, the Running Man on Crybaby could easily fit on Red Star Woo. That's a compliment. But this is also where I feel obligated to mention that Vince Staples' brand of rap rock is seamlessly his own. I want to double down on this. He's only gotten better with every album in refining his melodic hooks. And while he might sound a little bit more world-weary than his loudest nasal shouts on early records, where I can recognize the rougher filters serving as some amplification, with some of his most burly grooves to date here, the sing-song flows are impeccable. The tricky thing in some rap rock is when the MC has to yell to get over the louder guitars, so the flows get simplified or just come across as overwhelming to the senses. Rage Against the Machine has entered the chat on both sides of the coin, but Vince doesn't take that approach, and I think he's better for it. This is a masterclass of building this slow miasma of tension where the verses can function, but the hooks still have weight. Maybe not exploding, but catching vibes all the same, perfect from a summer afternoon. These are hooks that if you don't know all the words, and let's be real, if Vince Staples is performing at American Freedom 250, it is a favorable bet that some of the audience might not know all the words ahead of time, but a hook repeating God Bless the USA should go down easy. A hook on Cotton about music picking him up when he's feeling down. A good military-esque marching band chant on 7 in the morning. The Running Man hook is just telling folks to run. That'll work for the mosh pit. Maybe the conspiracy-minded folks might get into TV Guide with lines like, I think the television's controlling me. That's some good old-fashioned American spirit now. Well, right. Number 5. It's the favor that white people deserve. Okay, if you can't tell by this point, let me state it plainly. Vince Staples' Crybaby is an excellent project, if not one of the best of 2026. I wouldn't even want the implication of danger to fall on him by performing. And I'm aware that in service of a very dark joke that it could all be taken the wrong way. Washington, D.C. might be majority black, but there's no guarantee the audience of this America Freedom 250 would be. And even though Vince Staples might put on an incredible performance and entertainment overrides everything, the last thing I would want is some enterprising car dealership owner from the exurbs of a minor Midwestern city to get any bad ideas involving firearms if he gets annoyed. Especially if the last time he was in DC was on January 6th. But that means we have to understand why he might get aggrieved, and get into what Vince Staples actually said on Crybaby, where auspiciously it seems like a whole lot of very thick hip-hop heads are suddenly discovering that Vince Staples might actually have something to say in his bars. At least from what I can tell from the screenshots of white people who really liked the rock-adjacent production, but got real uncomfortable with what he actually said. Like how that lead-off single, Blackberry Marmalade, mentions the titular condiment and sweet tea to help him beat out that summer heat with all manner of crackers. What do you mean? The song is about more? About how black art is exploited within the confines of a colonial system, where white people claim that they invented all of it and they're smiling widely even though they're secretly miserable and exploited by the same system and may want you dead, and the post-chorus is a plea to not get gunned down, where the bridge spells out a racial slur for black people that's almost egging the white audience to sing along. And let's be honest, if he performed, some of them would. I mean, that's a lot for a opening track of an album. How about Only in America, where he's speaking about the black family trying to make their life in the US of A, that you can be anything you dream and that you wish life was this simple. What do you mean there's a line about being hard to see stars from behind bars, with a direct critique of black respectability politics that only highlights the paranoia of living in that late capitalist suburban hellscape as he clutches his gun? I mean, surely the big bad wolf with the Slick Rick sample will go down easier. American Freedom 250 in their initial guest list, they wanted to elevate some of those icons of late 80s and early 90s rap. Oh wait, that line is highlighting the interweaving metaphors of white evangelical Christianity with the police, directly linked to Slick Rick's sample of cops killing black kids, and how he's really getting sick of the jingles and dry snitching by those who want to succeed in the system by playing on Black Death or saying that black folks are responsible for it, but also highlighting how American imperialism under Africa had a black face under Barack Obama. I mean, that plays on some very charged racialized rhetoric, and against black people that overlaps with Go Go Gorilla, which calls out the genocide by name, but America, in that nation, it's sanitized, clearly trying to paper over what America does globally and ignore what they did internally historically, or rather what they're still doing now, the black kids. Because Cotton directly ties that haunted parallel to what happened in the South during slavery and Reconstruction and Jim Crow, and how every balm you might find or create cannot soothe for long. It gets darker even still if you've heard the vinyl exclusive bonus track Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's a very deliberate reference to Black Wall Street that was burned in a white race riot, but the charge that Vince Staples makes is harsher. I get why he kept it as an exclusive. Mixed company who don't know likely wouldn't handle it well. I'm a little antsy about talking about it myself, because he probably knows that Black Wall Street in Tulsa was aggressively rebuilt after getting burned down, before getting ruthlessly gentrified and commodified in the decades to come, where there are some black folks who would prefer to listen to Marcus Garvey, and if we remember Kendrick Lamar on a certain song of To Pimp a Butterfly, he might have all the answers, but then they would play those capitalist games, rather than any actual revolution to push back harder. And if you're mad at Vince Staples for calling that out and making you uncomfortable, when you don't want to know your own history? The most telling point comes after the third verse, where he runs through a list of black revolutionaries in the Panthers, many of them killed by the US government, and he highlights, instead of actually taking up that revolutionary cause, you're going to yell at him on social media about a beat or a sound that you don't like, made you uncomfortable? Because that's the rub now, isn't it? Vince Staples has always had the view of where his art intersects with commerce and propaganda. The easy comparison to make is TV Guide with Well, when Vince Staples made his own Netflix TV show for 2 seasons that not enough of y'all actually watched, where the song could feel dated with its reference to TV controlling people, but how different is that than anything shown when compared to now with social media? How much are they just selling the same script, pitching the same sort of ugly machismo, running away with more of the same money, where it's easier to just succumb, just be entertained, but if the entertainment is your exploitation, your pain, your death, there is some righteous fury at screaming back, what the fuck are you looking at? But what Vince Staples has always understood is the mundane reality of suffering under that frame. It's not just atomized moments of fury, the mental hell that lingers when you gotta live in that environment. White Flag wraps in a relationship metaphor, but very quickly you get the realization the second verse is speaking from the systemic abuse itself, hoping that you'll accept the narcotic of falling in line. The revealing line is, hip-hop taught me y'all love black folks, but that's not enough, because the note of weary sarcasm and highlighting how America and a capitalist system loves what black people create for them, but that care ends starkly when you start asking for reparations or basic human dignity or even have the art taken seriously. The Kendrick Lamar parallel feels very deliberate here, down apt to squabble up, and it's exhausting to keep fighting every day for even that. And The Running Man only further highlights that parallel between street level trauma and then repackaging it. Is it just minstrelsy, or as Do You Know the Devil makes more explicit, just succumbing to a darker calling that will drive people away? And quote again, when life gets hard and death gets way too close for you to be comfortable, will you seek God or will you fall from grace? Adapt to human nature. We're all mistakes. Yeah, the hooks might make you dance and mosh. Vince remains as bleak as ever. Some things really haven't changed. Now, this has led to an interesting critique of this album that, again, I think he should headline at America Freedom 250, basically saying that Vince Staples not saying anything all that new, especially in terms of politics. Hip-hop has been on this time for a while, and Vince putting all of this in more simplistic language might not move the needle, especially compared to more radical politics, which he might have, he might not. It's a little ambiguous, especially if he wants to sell records. Indeed, if you want to get a little bit more insufferable about it, and you did not hear Tulsa, Oklahoma, you could say that a lack of a leftist class-based lens limits where Vince Staples can reasonably take any revolutionary sloganeering. It could be seen as hedging his bets. And I would argue that's a misreading of scale, theme, and what Vince has actually said on previous albums and his interviews. He has always been one who has prized his blunt accessibility. He's not going to talk down to people, especially in the streets, making the message digestible for the masses. You don't need jargon to read between the lines if you're about that life. I mean, you could argue that there is an audience that only takes black life seriously when processed through constructed tropes of black struggle and individual salvation, the whole 12 years of slave framing, and that this album will sell to the audience that wants to signal their allegiance with that cause. But as much as I think this would move units and push properly on its sound and hooks alone, I think Vince Staples has way too much energy and making way too many people uncomfortable and not giving them the easy way out. The more nuanced critique is that Vince Staples has been saying this for damn near a decade. FM utilized the construct of summertime West Coast radio to highlight this same sort of sick, dehumanizing brand of industry commodification back in 2018. Then we made the pseudo-sequel in 2024 on Dark Times, down to the deliberate reference of the artificiality of the album construct. He only added more human depth and complexity to those themes. Crybaby does a little less to touch on the morally ambiguous gender politics or the very localized framing, leaving that more of the latter to the musical subtext, instead painting more broadly for a national point of focus. We're talking about my 3 Ps of great political art. This would be the equivalent of trading precision for populism or power. Except Vince Staples is way too pointed in his language to have surrendered that much in that discussion. I think he nails all 3. But if you were coming off of Dark Times and left Crybaby thinking, as some well-meaning critics did, yeah, it might be a little too familiar or obvious. It's not like we haven't heard this before. Sure hell is not escapist when you turn off the album to acknowledge how much it just mirrors reality. Is it just Vince saying it that might make it special? Does he think his audience doesn't get it? And the answer to that question is yes. And it's not just that Vince Staples thinks his audience, especially his white audience, doesn't get the point. He knows that. Throughout the Dark Times tour, you could tell that he was looking out at many a white face who were just there to see him dance, wave his hands, be no threat. Or at his stop on Tyler the Creator's Camp Flog Gnaw Festival, he was openly calling them stupid motherfuckers for singing along to some real street shit, recognizing that to many, it was not about solidarity for his struggle, so much as that he was giving them great beats and good entertainment and nothing more. At least to them. They were looking for a moment to cosplay being about that life and not understanding nor seeming to care to understand the consequences of living that life. And if there's anything that proves that in spades, it is that same audience hearing this album and complaining about it, where there's less artistic deflection or obfuscation, where the music videos are more charged than ever in their imagery, where the album art is a troll in and of itself and conspicuously not responding all that well when they heard it. The cruel irony is that Vince Staples never pulled his punches before. It was plain as day on FM and Dark Times and all throughout his catalog if you were listening to it. But an audience of white people just looking to turn up when it's rap music that only start paying attention to what he actually said when he moved into a genre they consider more respectable. But even then, there are folks who are catching this when they're listening on their headphones or on the bigs, who claim they're hip-hop heads because they read a Genius annotation or they can clock a sample and then snitch on it online. The average concert goer, the casual listener who might catch America Freedom 250 because Vince Staples is reportedly a big name, that's kind of cool. Do you think they would know more? That they would catch more than the hook if they heard him on stage? Especially if he's rapping fast. How often have we been told that the music's good? Who cares that much about the lyrics? How often have we heard the story of politicians shamelessly professing fandom for certain acts without ever really processing what they're saying? From Paul Ryan and Rage Against the Machine, to Ronald Reagan co-opting Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA, to the goddamn YMCA by the current presidential administration. This is an event that probably booked Martina McBride on the basis of the song Independence Day, not realizing that it's not so much about patriotism, but escaping domestic abuse. Somebody don't tell Republican politicians about that either. Do you think they would do the work to clock what Vince Staples is actually rapping about, singing to their faces, especially when the grooves are this tight? A whole lot of his own fans didn't do that with previous projects. Of course, the more insidious side comes from the implication of Vince Staples' meta-commentary that he well knows that so long as the conversation only circles art, it stays away from actually driving change, getting to the streets. And those in power will weaponize that commodification and endless conversation in order to maintain their power, tighten their grip. The reason I would warn Vince Staples away from doing America Freedom 250, beyond, the flagrantly obvious, is that this sort of existential nightmare, it might not be worth the bag. But he'd already know that. He wouldn't need me to sell him. Hell, everything I'm saying here for him is not news. But maybe the audience attending American Freedom 250 could afford to experience a little bit of a taste if Vince Staples headlined. Maybe I want to hear that. Especially by the time you get to the closing track, 7 in the Morning, which is all about American military interventionism, especially in the Middle East. Written from the perspective of a kid who's getting bombed out, where they'll still hear exceptionalist propaganda flying in the face of the carnage before their very eyes, all repackaged as entertainment by those who never quite face the consequences except when that impacts them at the gas pump, where it affects their wallets. A glimpse behind the curtain. A snapshot of what's done abroad and then transported home and vice versa. The twisted authoritarian snake eating its own tail. The fruits of a poison pill of nationalism getting called home to roost. Maybe just enough that it's not just entertainment forged in its own traumatic cycle. And for a split second, they got to acknowledge what the United States has done or enabled worldwide at their own expense. Especially as back home, it's not been great for a long time, and they know that too. And maybe there's a reason for it, beyond the black and brown family around the block. That maybe more of them are on your side than what they can identify as America. And that things can change if you go outside and you put in the work. I mean, what else are you going to do? Cry about it?